Hello, I'm Joe Clark and I'm here to welcome you to part 2 of our series Cruising in the 20th Century. All the film taken in this series was taken by passengers and crew who cruised from the 30s right through to the present day. You'll notice vast changes in the places that we visit, in the clothes that the passengers wore, and in the activities that they took part in. Our first clip on this film is of Arcadia on a Pacific voyage. We follow that with Orsova on a northern cruise, and finally we have footage of Andes on part of a world cruise in 1964. But before I start the film, let me introduce you to Carola Ingle, a great friend of ours from our days at sea. Over to you, Carola.
I've known piano since the days before I can even remember. In the 50s and 60s, I was lucky enough to be able to go to sea as an assistant purser. My last voyage was to Hong Kong as a supernumerary when I left the ship there to live with my father. Those of you who've been to the Far East since those days will know how many changes have taken place, and the joy of this film is that it shows these places before all these changes happened. The film which follows is a composite of many cinefilms taken by crew and passengers, but for our purposes we can pretend to be on board Arcadia.
We're leaving Sydney on a 3-week voyage around the Pacific. Pass a shore Seville ship of the Gothic class as we're about to sail under Sydney Harbour Bridge. And make our way towards the famous Sydney Heads and the Pacific Ocean. We have several days at sea before reaching Singapore. Passengers watch from the ship the traditional welcome of a dragon dance. And we have a chance to look at the sampans in the harbour, most of which are used for commercial purposes. Then there's a chance to go ashore and see Singapore as it was in the 1960s. A visit to the Tiger Barn Gardens. Then back to the ship. Out at sea, there's time to relax and enjoy the facilities, as swimming pool seems particularly popular at this time. Two days later we're in Manilla and some passengers hire a jeep for some sightseeing. Manilla was badly damaged by the retreating Japanese in 1945. One of the less attractive pastimes in Manilla. We're back at sea and headed for Hong Kong. We've arrived in Hong Kong and we see many junks and other craft in this very, very busy harbour. A lot of the people live and work in their boats. The busy streets of Kowloon. And then we cross on the ferry to Hong Kong Island. We take a trip out to Aberdeen, where literally thousands of people are all crammed together and living in their boats. The smell and the smoke and the din and squalor is unimaginable, and yet here you will find floating restaurants where the elite of Hong Kong will take their private junks and come out for an evening meal. Our next excursion is to the New Territories. Just watch these fascinating scenes as a farmer with his water buffalo ploughs the fields, and then the ladies sow the rice for next year's crop. And not far away in a river, others are doing the weekly wash as the children play in the river. And home is where the washing is hung out to dry. These two lads are busy building their own boat. One of the outlying islands. It's time to leave Hong Kong and make our way to Macau, Portuguese territory, not so very far away. Arcadia is back at sea and now headed for Yokohama. The officer of the watch looks out and our course is steady. Arrival in Japan. We get our first glimpse of Mount Fuji, covered in snow. There's a gathering of geisha girls in their colourful kimonos on the wharf. We head off to the station for a trip to Kyoto. It's early in the morning and businessmen are waiting for their trains to take them into Tokyo. We head out into the countryside. Come to a river and see several strips of cloth lying out on the shingles to dry. In the river, a woman is busy rinsing. The lady takes some of the cloth and puts it in this spin dryer. In Kyoto, looking very smart, we start our tour. Amongst the sights is this fascinating Japanese garden, a sacred garden. And now we see the famous Golden Pagoda. A visit to the great Buddha at Kamakura. In the 60s, you still saw a lot of the Japanese ladies in traditional dress. We made our way back via Osaka to Kobe, and the ship is seen here leaving Kobe. Madam Butterfly waves to Lieutenant Pinkerton. She won't see him again, as Arcadia now steams towards Vancouver. Passengers gather to watch the ship's entry under Lions Gate Bridge. The scenery around Vancouver is spectacular. The Seattle ferry passes through the harbour, and we look at the skyline of the city. Timber is floated down the river, and men jump from log to log as they prepare it for loading. Totem poles are a common sight in parks in Vancouver. You see Lake Capilano and the Cleveland Dam. Our Millennium Bridge has nothing on this bridge for wibbly wobbly. The gardens in Victoria Island. And now we leave Vancouver and we'll head for San Francisco. The stars and stripes are hoisted to the top of the mast. They get entangled and we have to send a man up to free them. We pass under the Golden Gate Bridge. San Francisco has a wonderful skyline. The cable cars are a particular attraction and are still running to this very day. This is the Oakland Bay Bridge, a far more impressive bridge than Golden Gate, I always thought. These old tugs pull us away from the wharf. This must have been one of the last times they were ever used. And we passed Alcatraz on our way out. And soon we'll go under the Golden Gate again on our way to Long Beach. San Francisco can be 20 degrees lower than the surrounding countryside, and the crew have changed into blues just for the 2 days stay. Some lovely shots of Arcadia as she makes her way towards Long Beach, the port for Los Angeles. Arrival in Long Beach. We met by a group of scouts and guides. The band is playing and the majorette is whirling her baton. You'll never see that again. Well caught, madam. These so-called nodding donkeys pump up the oil. A visit to Anaheim and Disneyland, where we're met by Mickey Mouse himself. Jungle ride we pass hippopotamus, crocodiles and African dancers, all very realistic. And then we take a Mississippi riverboat for another little trip around Fantasyland, a burning log cabin. And those apparently responsible. And then it's off to the Columbia studios. We have to stop as this train goes by at a crossing. There are several different sets. We see this one of a western town. You can come out now, they're all dead. After 2 days in Long Beach, we embark again for the next leg of our cruise to Honolulu. Crew exercise the lifeboats. Arrival in Oahu, Hawaii. The Aloha Tower. See the Matson liner Mariposa. Our captain is presented with a lei by the King and Queen. And we are entertained to some hula hula dancing. Now we're off for a trip around the island. You can see Diamond Head in the background. We come now to the war memorial and graves of those that died On that infamous day in December 1941 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The graves seemed to stretch for miles. No trip to Oahu would be complete without a visit to the famous Waikiki Beach. See Diamond Head in the background, people enjoying the sands, others are surfing, and little boats are sailing around. It's all very idyllic. I have to tell you that the sand is imported from over the other side of the island. Just one of the luxury pools of a hotel behind the beach. But we have to say goodbye to these lovely islands and rejoin Arcadia. She now sails towards Suva in Fiji and Auckland. But we're going to finish this film as she enters Sydney Harbour on a rather damp and drizzly day. But it's been a wonderful cruise nonetheless. We leave Arcadia in Sydney, about to pass under the harbour bridge. I do hope you enjoyed that clip. I'd now like to introduce you to Michael Whittingham, a friend of ours, who with his wife Robina has cruised since 1967, virtually always with P&O. In fact, they're booked for 2 cruises again this year. They've noticed many changes over the years. Here he is now to tell you about a cruise that he did with the family in 1968 on Oronsay.
Hello, my name is Michael Whittingham. My wife and I have been very fortunate to cruise from the mid-50s right up to the present time with P&O. The clip you'll see is of the P&O Oronsay, which was a cruise to the Baltic starting from Amsterdam and going up to Copenhagen. With us we had our 2 young children. Fine experience for them at an early age. From Amsterdam we cruised to Copenhagen, where we spent a day and a half in port, and on the itinerary we had a very enjoyable time in Sweden, crossing to Malmo and travelling inland to Lake Ring and the university town of Lund. Please now sit back and enjoy the clips of that particular cruise.
It's mid-April, it's cold and threatening rain, but that doesn't seem to dampen our enthusiasm for the cruise we're about to embark on. The baggage comes on in slings. There are some interesting statistics on the promenade deck. The ship is ready to sail and the gangway is lowered. There's time now to familiarise ourselves with the ship. We pull away from Ocean Terminal at the start of our cruise. Cunard's Carmania is waiting to board her passengers. A hovercraft, still very novel at the time, passes us, whilst we pass a tanker out of Fowley. Amsterdam is the first port on our itinerary. We have a chance to look around the harbour. We see Oronsay from the dock as we leave for a shore excursion. The coaches are all ready for us, but as you can see it's still quite cold. We're going to have a look around Franz Rusen's tulip show. It's really stunning, despite the cold weather. There's plenty of time to stroll around these beautiful gardens, taking in the tulips in full flower, fountains, ponds and windmills. After lunch we are taken to the embarkation point for a canal tour. If you're ever in Amsterdam, this canal tour is a must. The flags are out, but I think there's a dubious reason. It certainly has nothing to do with patriotism. More, I think, flown to attract those in search of a little Dutch liaison. There's time to take in the city before returning to the ship in the evening. The ship sails for Copenhagen, and the ship's company change into white uniforms. This officer looks frozen. Despite the weather, there are some on deck playing quoits. Arrival in Copenhagen, and again we get the chance to have a look around the harbour from the ship. Coaches line up on the wharf, and we're soon on our way for a ferry trip to Malmo. We reach the ferry terminal, and the passengers can leave the coach and board the ferry. And now the coach is loaded. We pass the inbound ferry. It's not long before we arrive in Malmo and are ready for our tour. some more beautiful gardens. We're shown fountains and statues and churches, all very 60s and up to date at that time. The tour is quickly over and we have to get back to the ferry for our trip back to Copenhagen, passing this fishing trawler on the way. There's a large ferry tied up in port, and we pass this two-masted schooner, also tied up. The next morning it's off ashore again for sightseeing around Copenhagen. We can look back at Orsova as we leave to visit the famous mermaid. The mermaid is probably the most famous landmark in Copenhagen harbour. And then, by way of the city, we go to the Tivoli Gardens. There are several buildings in the gardens, a Chinese temple, then this modern fountain, an Indian palace, we pass through the gardens themselves, which are looking beautiful at this time of the year. And we see a Japanese pagoda. A strange fountain, and then another which the birds are certainly enjoying. And before we go back to the ship, we can take a well-earned cuppa in this tea house by the lake. And afterwards, a little retail therapy in town before we board our coaches, which will take us back to Orsova. The ship leaves on our way back to Southampton, pass through crowded shipping lanes in the Sound. Say, this one looks a bit close. Oh! Ouch! Missed by hair's breadth. The sun is out and all is right with the world. Kronborg Castle, Shakespeare's Helsingør. And we take on another pilot. There's a lookout posted right forward by the jackstaff. On our last day we steam gently towards home. It's even hot enough for sunbathing. And a spot of ice cream for the kids. It's raining again as we come into Southampton and pushed gently towards the wharf. It's been a lovely cruise despite the weather, and we'll go again next year if we can. Now Michael will tell you about a cruise that his friends did on Andes to the Far East.
Hello again. You're now going to see some film which has been shot in 16mm on the Royal Mail steamer Andes. Our long-term friends sailed in 1964 from Southampton out to Colombo as part of an Andes world voyage. So sit back and enjoy film now shot in 16mm.
Before we can go on any cruise, we have first to select our ship and book our ticket. The Royal Mail office is in Cockspur Street. Now that does look really enticing at this time of the year. Let's get away from it all. Our train arrives in Southampton. All wrapped up in our winter coats, we're ready to board. And Andes is ready to sail. The gangway is lowered. Tugs stand by to pull Andes away from the wharf once the ropes are cast off. And well-wishers watch as Andy is pulled away from the wharf. She'll soon be under her own steam and heading down the Solent towards the Isle of Wight and the Channel. Passengers gather on deck for lifeboat drill. As we steam past the Isle of Wight, the launch comes out to take off the pilot. At this stage, it's time for afternoon tea, which is served in the lounge. There'll be plenty of time to practice our golf shots. Others, still well wrapped up, play deck quoits. We have to be at our best for the captain's cocktail party. And we all line up to have our photograph taken. Unfortunately, one of our fellow passengers is taken ill, and a Spanish launch is sent out to pick her up and take her ashore for hospitalization. I think that hurt. These things happen from time to time, and we have to feel sorry for those concerned. The ship passes Gibraltar and enters the Mediterranean. The sun's out now and it's beginning to warm up. We arrive at Malta, our first port of call. A little gentle guitar music makes us welcome. Don't ask him where to go, madam, you know what sailors are. That's better, get it from the horse's mouth. So they take a town trip in a galley. We can now look around the harbour, which is strangely empty, and Valletta's narrow streets. Back at sea, and it's warm enough to get out the swimming gear. There's plenty of time to lounge around and be waited on hand and foot, or to work off some excess energy. We arrive in port side. Before we transit the canal, some lucky passengers will get the opportunity to travel to Cairo and the pyramids. Our arrival in Cairo, we visit the museum which houses the Tutankhamun exhibition. The Hilton Hotel on the banks of the Nile. The Central Mosque. And now we're on our way to the pyramids themselves. A camel ride is part of the fun. The Sphinx and its inscrutable smile. After a long, tiring but enjoyable day, we return to the ship. The next morning, the ship starts its transit through the Suez Canal. A ferry packed with workers crosses over near the entrance. Small diesel train passes going the other way. We pass one of the many stations on the way. Another ferry waits across the canal. This Egyptian gentleman is taking his camel's walkies. A small rowing boat is hoisted aboard for the transit in case we should need to tie up. Another train passes. And now the ship moves out into the Great Bitter Lakes. There's still quite a way to go, through a bit more canal to Suez, and then the ship will move out into the Red Sea and make her way towards Colombo. During our passage of the Red Sea, the catering staff have prepared an on-deck buffet. This makes a pleasant change from eating in the dining saloon. Now, I was always told not to go swimming immediately after my lunch. We spend several days in the sweltering heat of the Red Sea before arrival in Colombo. There's a lot of shipping in the port, and there'll be a lot more outside waiting their turn to offload their cargoes. Bumboats come out to sell their wares of ebony elephants and ivory inlaid cigarette boxes. The passengers go ashore. For our friends, a last look back on Andes. They're leaving the ship here. A troupe of Canadian dancers are there to welcome them as they step ashore. Colombo itself is hot and noisy. A snake charmer and street conjurer provides a little bit of entertainment. Now you see it, now you don't. An ox cart passes us as we make our way to the Mount Lavinia Hotel, where we'll be staying for the next night before flying back to the UK. There's still plenty of time to enjoy the exotic sights of this island. It was then called Ceylon, it's now called Sri Lanka. We went back in 2003. A lot has changed, but it's still worth a visit. This brings to an end part 2 of our series. We hope you've enjoyed it and will join us for the next part, part 3.